So in this video, we're actually going to do a reaction video to this video up on the screen behind me from Marriage Helper. When I first found out I was getting divorced, when my wife came to me and told me she wanted a divorce in April of 2021, I was shell-shocked. I was completely blindsided. I had no idea she was unhappy to that degree. And that's not uncommon. In fact, most of the time, that's how it happens. Women's feelings of affection and love tend to dissipate slowly over time, and they don't tend to say anything about it until they're past their breaking point. In other words, when they're pretty much past the point of no return, that's when they let the guy know. And 80% of the time, it is the women who dump the guys in that same kind of scenario. So that was the situation I was in. And in that situation, I became desperate for answers. At first, of course, I was desperate to reconcile. I was desperate to understand. I was desperate to fix things and turn things around. I'm not in that mindset anymore, but I was then. And in that desperation, I turned to YouTube, just like you're probably doing now. And one of the first organizations I found on YouTube was indeed Marriage Helper, the people who created this video we're going to kind of go through today. And I devoured tons of their content, their videos and their articles and everything I could get my hands on to help me understand what was going on and to help me try and get my ex-wife to change her mind. And in the end, that didn't work. That doesn't mean it wouldn't work for you. I do feel very good about recommending Marriage Helper, and I do like a lot of the things that they have to say, but not everything, as you'll see in today's video. Hi, I'm Jeff Campbell from DivorcedParentsClub.com, and I'm on a mission to help other guys going through or who have already gone through a divorce deal with the aftermath that we're dealing with, whether that's dating after divorce, dealing with a toxic ex, co-parenting, you name it. I cover it on this channel. Now, in this video that we're about to go through, it's basically someone wrote into them asking for advice. In this particular case, it's a wife who cheated on her husband 6 years earlier, and he's finally now at the point where he's decided he can't take it and he wants a divorce. Seems a little bit crazy to me, but that's the context of the video that we're about to watch. Just so you have some understanding of my ability to relate, I did actually cheat on my wife back in 2013. I had an affair with one woman that lasted about 2 months. And so I know firsthand how much devastation an affair can bring to a relationship. I've also been cheated on in relationships as well, so I've kind of been on both sides of the equation. Definitely not something I would ever do again on either side of the equation. But just so you know, I do have some experience in this arena. But that's what this video is about. Let's get started.
Dr. Beam and Kimberly Holmes have asked me to read a question that was submitted by one of our listeners for today's episode. This person asks, is there any way to help him forgive me after having an affair over 6 years ago? I had an affair and we went to one of your intensive weekends. We decided to stay together, but after 6 years, he filed for divorce and told me he just couldn't forgive me. What should I do?
Now, I want to stop right there and say there's a few key details that we don't know from the information we were just given. For starters, we don't know how long the affair lasted. Was it a week? Was it a month? Was it a year? Was it multiple years? Was it the guy's best friend? There's a lot of details that we don't know, and I guess we won't know, that would be crucial in my eyes in determining how quickly or if it's reasonable to think that he should have gotten over her affair by now. Let's keep going.
As we all recognize, it is the person who's been hurt that gets to choose whether they forgive or not. At the same time, when you have a husband that you have been back together for 6 years, trying to put things together, and he says to you, I just can't forgive you, then we would start thinking, okay, maybe, just maybe, there's something deeper going on here inside of him. Because you would think that within a 6-year period, surely we could have gotten past it. We'll be okay now. We can be closer. We can grow beyond like people do when they get past a major catastrophe. And if that hasn't happened, then there's got to be a reason it hasn't happened.
I agree with that. There must be something going on. And again, we didn't get a lot of crucial details in the viewer's original email to them, or at least the information that they provided to us in their video. So there's a lot that we don't know, but I agree. Typically, 6 years is more than enough time to get over an affair if your spouse cheated on you and you're willing to forgive them and move forward. And in their case, they went to Marriage Helper's 3-day intensive workshop to basically try and save the marriage. That's a 3-day workshop. It's nonstop all day long, 3 days back to back. The husband at that time was obviously willing to go, went through that. I know personally that workshop has a 77% success rate. So the vast majority of people that do attend that workshop do end up saving their marriage. So he's one of the rare exceptions, it sounds like. But again, there's still a lot we don't know.
You can ask questions like this. Okay, I understand that you want out. Can you help me understand what it is that you continue to feel? Can you help me understand how intense that emotion is? Because there's a great possibility here. Now, I don't know. I'm just giving you a possibility. That what's going on here is that he has never grieved properly. In other words, if you do grieve, Kimberly, I have read, and I'm not sure this is right. You're the psychologist. I'm the marriage guy. But I have read that if a person works on grieving, in other words, you don't just wallow in the pain, but if a person actually tries to get better, that it takes, if it takes longer than 1.5 years, you're probably going to need some kind of professional help. And so if my mom dies and 1.5 years later, I'm still in the throes of distress by that.
Deep grief. That's what it's called, deep grief.
Deep grief. Mm-hmm. And so deep grief is grief that's not going to get better by itself. It's going to take some kind of a process to help me deal with it. Am I right about that?
I have not heard the time frame, but I would agree with that in principle. Yes. Deep grief, you physically, psychologically, physiologically, you can't live in deep grief. Mm-hmm. So if someone is still stuck there 18 months later and they're not making any movement out, they need help.
Now, I will say that if the husband is in this deep grief phase, as she described it, then that is indicative of something beyond a normal affair in my eyes. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier, it could be that the affair lasted for years behind his back. Maybe it was with his best friend. Maybe it was with his family member. Maybe it was with his coworker or something beyond just the quote unquote average typical affair. Something that would cause really large amounts of extra damage, extra pain, extra suffering, enough where 6 years later he's still holding on to that. The other thing that we don't know, both from the original email that was sent in and from their discussion thus far, is what she did, what the wife did to try and rebuild the trust with her husband. We don't know that. Just not enough information here. But I can tell you, as a husband who worked hard to rebuild the trust with his wife after my affair in 2013, I can tell you that you have to do a lot to rebuild trust. I gave my wife every password to every social media account I had, my email. She had full access to my phone records, things like that. I over-communicated my whereabouts when I was either not at home or at work. She knew exactly where I was at all times, who I was with, etc. I never went out and did something without her knowing about it and being aware of where I was and who I was with and what time I was going to be coming home. And it wasn't like that for forever, but it was like that for a year or two. And I understood clearly that that was my role in helping her heal from the trauma I had put her through. And I had to 100% commit to that level of trust rebuilding in order to make it work. And we did make it work. And ultimately, she did ask for a divorce in 2021. Had nothing to do with that affair from 2013, though.
And so, again, we don't know the whole story here, but the fact that he stayed there 6 years
That's a lot, yeah.
and still feels that kind of pain, does that sound as if that might be deep grief?
It could be. So if we take the definition of grief that our friends David and Debbie Matthews hold to, which I like, is that grief is a loss of expectation. So I thought life was going to be this way and it was not. Whether that was a loss of a person, of your expectation of marriage, in this situation. And so therefore, if he has not had time to process that loss and therefore see the possibility of a new future, then he could definitely be stuck there and also holding on to resentment.
Okay. When you say have not had time, it appears with 6 years he would have had time, then that would imply to me that he didn't know how to process it.
Right. So if you take that same premise of that we know from the marriage research that people typically wait 6 years after a problem starts before they get help for it. It's like that here, except with a loss of expectation, a loss of what his marriage would be. The problem started 6 years ago, but if he hasn't dealt with it in the right ways, then it's not getting better, it's getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening.
Which means, based on our experience, that in all likelihood, I'm not saying this is 100% going to happen, but in all likelihood, that if he does divorce her and marries another woman or stays single, either way, he's still going to have the grief.
For sure.
And I do 100% agree with that. If he is holding on to this pain, this suffering, this trauma that he experienced and he hasn't let it go, he's buried it deep inside, which is something that guys do have a tendency to do. We do have a tendency to bury uncomfortable feelings deep down inside of us in the hopes that, we can just be the strong, silent type and like tough it out and get through it that way. And that doesn't really work that way. Ultimately, feelings will come out. And if you bury them deep down inside long enough, they'll tend to come out in explosive, often inappropriate ways. But for whatever reason, if he has buried those feelings deep down, they're still in him. And he could divorce his wife tomorrow, move on to some other aspect of his life or a new relationship or whatever. That pain, that trauma is literally embedded in his tissue. It's embedded in him. It's not going to just suddenly magically disappear just because he's no longer married to the woman that helped cause that trauma.
Because the grief won't be better by changing locations.
Right. But I don't think it's just, we don't know because it's not said here. But I think it's not just grief, it's anger, it's resentment. Those are the negative emotions welling inside of him, where he's finally looking at her and saying, I'm done.
And if he is looking at his wife and with anger and bitterness and resentment and saying, I'm done, it's probably because, and I touched on this earlier, it's probably because she hasn't done a good enough job of rebuilding that trust and that connection and that intimacy with him. And she just hasn't done it. Again, we don't really know because it wasn't explained in the original email that was sent in to them, or if those details were there, they didn't share them in their video. But I would be willing to bet you the wife has not worked hard enough to rebuild the husband's trust.
He's going to carry that into the next relationship and not trust, or just not enter into a next relationship because he doesn't trust. And he's still going to deal with that, how that's going to affect him as an individual.
And I completely agree with that.
Which isn't healthy.
Right. Now, if she's watching this program, and I hope she is, she's thinking, well, yeah, but you're not answering my question. I understand what you're saying. I get it. But I want to do something to help him get past this. So what do I do? Now, it may be too late, because if he doesn't give you opportunity and he's divorcing you, may not have opportunity to do this right now. But sometimes you can help a person through the grieving process. Now, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but sometimes the way you help another person through the grieving process is when you let them tell you what they feel. Meaning, okay, let's talk about the hurt that you have. And if he in that does something that you won't like, which will be, you did this, you hurt me, you'll naturally want to become defensive if that happens, because that's what humans do. But if you're able to listen to that, to understand that, to hear that, and to empathize with him, not justifying what you did, not explaining what you did, but saying, you're right, I see how you feel that way, that kind of pain, then you can actually help him start into the grieving process so he can start dealing with all these other things.
I agree with that. I just don't understand why in 6 years that's never happened, especially if this couple had been to their 3-day intensive workshop. It feels to me like that kind of soul searching and trying to get to the root of the issues here seems like that would have happened years ago at this point. I don't know why it didn't happen at the 3-day intensive they intended, and I don't know why it hasn't happened in the years following that.
Now, it may be that he needs professional help to do that. And so if you have any influence left with him, if he'll listen to you at all, we want to recommend a resource of a company that allies with ours. Want to tell them about that?
Sure. Spark of Life. It is run by our friends that I just spoke about, David and Debbie Matthews, and they do retreats as well as have some other resources for people who are experiencing grief. And they have a lot of couples, or a lot of people, I should say, that have experienced the loss of marriage or the loss of the expectation of what they thought their marriage was going to be, that come from Marriage Helper and to them. And it's a beautiful next step to help people who are really struggling with overcoming that grief process. So we highly recommend it. We trust them, and they do good work.
Now, I realize you might be thinking, he's not going to listen to me, and he may not. But if you have any influence with him, here's the way I would recommend that you approach this. Don't approach it in terms of, well, this is the last step that might save our marriage, because it appears from what you're writing here, he's made up his mind, he doesn't want to be there. Therefore, don't propose anything that sounds as if you're trying not to understand the fact that he wants out. Instead, it could be something like this. I hate the fact that this still bothers you as much as it does 6 years later. I have heard of these people. They're very good people. They do a great job. They're recommended by the folks at Marriage Helper. We already know them. And so would you be willing to look at their website? Would you be willing to call and talk to one of them and consider the possibility of going to one of their intensive workshops? He probably won't want you to go with him, and that'll be okay. Mm-hmm. He can go by himself. The way that they work it, it'll do just as well if he goes by himself.
I will say, I doubt very seriously, based on the situation that's been described here, if that husband would be willing to entertain the idea of going to an intensive workshop again, having already done it 6 years earlier and having it not helped whatsoever. It doesn't seem to me he'd be willing to invest that. He wants out, and whether mistaken or not, he feels like his pain is going to go away when he gets out. Based on what we've heard here, I don't actually think that's going to happen. I think that pain is going to follow with him, but he's not going to see that right now. He's basically going to have to go through the separation process, or maybe even the divorce process, before he becomes aware of the fact that the grief is going to go with him no matter where he goes. And until he has that realization, I don't think he's going to be willing to entertain the idea of going to a retreat or something like that. And if anything, that should have been mentioned when they did the 3-day intensive retreat 6 years earlier, as well as counseling. I don't understand why he hasn't been, and they haven't together been in counseling all these years. Or maybe they have been, but that information was not included in the information provided in the video. And for sure, they should have been going to marriage counseling together. And if he was unable to deal with the grief and the trauma and the anger and the pain, he probably should have been going to therapy on his own as well.
But the fact that he's still 6 years into this indicates that there's something inside of him that still needs to heal, but you can't make it heal. You can just try to listen, try to understand, try to encourage him to find this other thing. But he continues to have, in his mind, a very negative picture of you. So that's why it is so crucial that you consistently live as the person that you've become, because now that you have learned better. And when I say consistently, understand that nobody will do that perfectly, and you won't either. But try your best to be that new person in all things. And even if you wind up divorced, it does not necessarily mean this is over.
And I just want to say, you can tell from their music that they're wrapping up their video. It still kind of flabbergasts me that at no point did they ever bring up what she may have done or not done to rebuild the trust in the relationship, because that is crucial. Love cannot exist where there is no trust. And if she didn't do the right things to rebuild his trust in her, then there was no way he was ever going to rekindle his love for her. And I'm just really surprised that they didn't touch on that at all. Now, granted, they didn't have the information based on what we saw at the beginning of the video as far as what was sent in from the viewer, but I still would have absolutely addressed it, because I feel like that's crucial, and I feel like that's highly likely that she didn't go far enough in that direction to rebuild the trust properly so that he could fall back in love with her. Anyway, interesting food for thought. I do still like Marriage Helper a lot, although I do take a definite issue with that omission from this video. If you like my video, please hit the like button and the subscribe button and the bell notification button too. That way you get notified of future videos like this that I put out. But for now, I'll see you in the next video.